Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero. Today, Charles Love, the author of Race Crazy and a few other books, joins me today. I had a great conversation with Charles. We talk how race has changed over the years, especially since I was a kid back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And we discuss the BLM movement a little bit, the movement for Black Lives, which is a completely different thing. And if you haven't heard of it, you need to look into it because it's pretty ominous shit. And we get into the 1619 Project a little bit towards the end, but really we just kind of talk about our views on race and kind of where we see things at the current moment in the culture. I think it's a great conversation. I think you're going to like it. As always, RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. Go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great libertarian and a great anarcho-capitalist. He's also a great graphic designer. He designed my podcast logo and the cover for my upcoming book, if I ever finish that shit. I'm such a bum. I need to get on it, right? All right, but anyway, RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting also has struck out on his own as an independent contractor, doing many different things in the tech world. So if you have any techie type shit you need help with, reach out to RyanBunting.com. I'm sure he can help you out because that's what he fucking does. Go to the Libertarian Institute at thelibertarianinstitute.org. That's where you'll find writers like Sheldon Richman, Jim Bovard, Ryan McMacken, also podcasts like this one. Also Scott Horton and Patrick McFarland, Keith Knight, Kyle Anzalone. There's a bunch of great people over there at the Libertarian Institute, and we're working really hard to put out great information for y'all to really consume each and every day. My wife hates it when I say each and every, which is why I did that. So go to thelibertarianinstitute.org and keep track of all of the best libertarians there are. Enjoy the show. And take three. Third time's the charm, man. We're going to get this done. It's recording now.
That's a plus. It's recording. That's a start, right? A really good, strong start.
Yes. So I'm here with Charles Love, the author of Race Crazy. And you're a radio talk show host as well? Is that?
I have a few irons in the fire. I am the host of the Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer in Chicago. I do a podcast called Cut the Bull with Shamika Michelle and Wilfred Riley. And I'm a freelance writer and the executive director of Seeking Educational Excellence, where, we started out trying to improve and close the gap in education between kids by focusing on solutions that will actually work rather than focusing on, social justice, race, and things of that nature before George Floyd's death. So obviously you had to shift a little bit because instead of dialing back that focus, it increased exponentially. So you had to shift the way you approached it. But that was the original goal, to just say, hey, there are differences. Some of the things are things you can't control. Some of the things you can't control. How about we spend our time, energy, money, and all that on the things we can control and see how much difference that makes, and then move on to the other things instead of doing it in the other order. And so far, it's an uphill battle.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the South, and I'm a blue collar guy. Always been a blue collar guy. So the shift in the attention on race has really bothered me because every person I've ever met that's black has been very independent thinking and very hardworking. And so I'm looking at this going, like, I don't understand. Like, I'm in my 40s. So in the 90s, it didn't feel like there was this tension. This didn't exist where I was growing up. And maybe it's because I was like lower middle class for a lot of my childhood. So like mixed race like environments were normal for me, and I never when they really started focusing on race here the last few years, at least in the on the mainstream level, it really it really kind of caught me off guard. I didn't know how to react to it at first.
Yeah, I can see it. One of the things obviously I do a lot of interviews and, I try to, you're answering some similar questions and you want people to see it. Everyone has a different platform, but sometimes you want your friends and your family to see it, but they get tired because like you're always saying these same things. That's why I like when these things tend to be more conversational than the scripted questions. It brings new kind of nuances to it, and one of the things that, based on what you said, that I think is really interesting is that obviously there's some issues, and there've always been issues, but you hear a lot about my truth and the Black experience, where everyone has an experience, right? And we can learn from everyone's experiences. So, what I'm finding as I talk to people is that, granted, there are issues, but they want to look at it in, pun intended, black or white, where things are really nuanced. And what you find is it's this weird dichotomy in the sense that the big cities have lots of diversity most of the time. But if it's like Chicago, they're very segregated, whether it's by, government fiat or self-selection.
Mm-hmm.
You have other areas like New York, that's a melting pot. You got, other places that are somewhere in the middle. So they see different races all the time. So the problems that they see, whether now we debate and argue whether they're right or not, but even if they're true, those problems aren't the same that people have in areas where it's an all white or all black neighborhood, right? So there may be issues, but they're different. But because the mainstream media is speaking to the larger groups, everyone has to hear the narrative as it's described by a New Yorker or Chicagoan or somebody from LA, right? So other people may say, yeah, there's some issues, but I don't see that particular thing. But we're all hearing the big city narrative. So it's different. And you could grow up in an all white town and there may be plenty of races in the town and plenty of wonderful people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you still don't have the same race based issues because the town's all white. So you don't, to be fair, you don't really know who in your town is racist. Because I would assume, I know some friends who actually have racist friends and family members. They tell me the truth because most of my liberal friends who are white will say, I'm not racist and racism exists and I'm an ally. But then I say, every time I challenge them on their friends, family, roommate from college, they're all like, well, none of those people are racist. So they can never tell me the racist person they know.
Mm.
But the people that I know would say, yeah, I came from a town and I knew some people, I got some people that would say some things, right? But in the day to day, they wouldn't hear it because there was no reason, there was nothing, no catalyst to bring it up, right? So if they don't see any black people, they had no reason to be like, white person racist, white person not racist, going about their day at the post office or whatever, saying, I hate, they had no reason to say that because the subject didn't come up. So unless they're watching the show or watching the news and they make some comment, there's no day-to-day interaction that would bring it up. But these people are acting as if all day long. I grew up in an all-white neighborhood. I knew everybody around me was racist. I can see the racism, and you black people are right. How did you see it? How racist do you have to be to not only hate black, but hate them so much that you talk about them all the time, even when they're not around? I just don't think that's logical.
Yeah.
Right. So to act like we all have the same approach is an issue. So I think that's part of the problem, that is not talked about, but it's underneath the race problem, the larger problem that people are talking about. And we all debate to what degree are they right or wrong, but we're ignoring the fact that there's the larger percentage of us are going through the day and all the people in our circle are talking about is work, kids, sports, crime, whatever. That's all they're talking about. They're not talking about the other stuff because they either don't see it or it's so low on a priority that they don't bring it up.
Right. One of the stories I often tell is about a gentleman that worked for my great grandma. She owned a hardware store in Lake Charles. Lake Charles is very minority run. I mean, there's a large black community, and now there's a large Hispanic community down there, right? And he was a black man, and his name was Jack, Mister. I always called him Mister Jack. And when I was a kid, I would go to her hardware store, and he would bring me out back, and he'd be cooking like gumbo and okra and tomatoes and so. And like I'd go out there and I'd hang out with him and sit on his knee and help him cook, and that's how I learned how to cook. Is like hanging out with Mr. Jack, and he was family. Like always, he died a couple of years ago, but he was always family to us, and he worked for my great grandma for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. I mean, like he was always there. And so it was never an issue of race. It was just character and the merit. And he was a hardworking guy, and he was loyal and faithful, and and so it never, I never saw that. It wasn't, I mean, I heard people, would say things, and I'd be like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about, right? And then there's always jokes and, people, especially with men on a construction site or or in the military or, trucking. I've been in trucking for 20 years. There's always men like busting each other's balls and talking shit. Like, I mean, that's just the way it is. And like we say a lot worse things than racial things. Like literally, if people would hear some of the conversations we had, it would just, especially in today's world, as weak-minded as people are, as sensitive as they are to language and words. I mean, you look at the whole Joe Rogan thing. I saw an article CNN wrote, and like it was like Joe Rogan saying the N word was like January 6th. It's like, all right, like whatever, man. It just like you can't, you have to have thick skin. And if you found like a place where people were sensitive, you would keep poking and prodding that spot until they calloused over and it didn't bother them anymore. And that's just part of the environment I grew up in and the way that things like operated where I grew up. Because if I wasn't picking on you, if I wasn't fucking with you, then I didn't like you. Like I wouldn't even waste my time with you, right? And so it's just this completely different mentality, and it's led me to believe that the racial problem is within the academics and not within the average citizen.
Right. Well, to the example you gave, I am listening to the argument that they make and watching the way people live and interact and the way they act. And I'm starting to believe that they don't believe what they're really saying. Now, some of them are true believers, but to your example, what I like, you talked about ribbing and the way people talk, and people are weak. So if they only heard it, how would they respond? And I had an interesting conversation with a high school student, a child of my friends, a couple months ago. And this is a perfect example of what you said, but also me saying they don't really believe what they say. Now, it's getting to the point that they're starting to believe it a little bit into, so that's our job to kind of say, do you really listen to what you just said? And they're like, oh, I see your point. So we're talking, and I guess we're talking about racism and how much racism do we all really, deal with on a day-to-day basis? And so people at the table started giving examples. Spoiler alert, nobody came up with any real ones. But anyway, he was like, okay, I got one, maybe. I'm in high school. And so he's telling me that the teacher, so there were other minority kids in the class, he's Black. Teacher was reading Huck Finn or Tom Sawyer or whatever, and reading through, and the N-words in it. So she's reading the book and she said what it says. She blah, 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 blah. She says nigger. And so he's like, well, so when she said that, it's like, I just kind of felt like, I'm not mad if she did it because it's in the book, but she should have kind of given us a warning, right? So this is what he said. He's chuckling because he sees how silly it sounds. And I'm laughing. I said, okay, I see what you said. You wanted sensitivity. You wanted a heads up. He said, yeah. So let me ask you a question. I said, I know you play a lot of video games and you got your headphones on, you're playing with your friends. And he said, yeah. I said, what type of things do you say when you have it on? And he just laughed because he knew where I was going. And then his mom is sitting there and she's like, oh yeah, I've walked past this room before. And I said, yeah. So the point is, if you all don't know, I'm sure 90% of people listen, understand what I'm talking about. But you talked about your friends in the ribbing and the military and the truckers and stuff. They're like that exactly, right? The same things we all did as a kid, same thing, all that stuff they were doing. Now in class, he's saying sensitive, sensitive, sensitive. Then he puts his headphones on and it's like they're playing the dozens, that they're making racial jokes and ethnic jokes, that they're a bunch of misogyny and all that stuff. And what I'm gonna do to you, profanity, talking about your mother. Don't have a hot mother. because then they're talking about your mother and all this stuff. And this is what they're doing while they're playing video games, right? And then they take their headphones off and then they're sensitive again. I was like, boy, you don't even believe what you just said. And all he could do was laugh.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of the way I look at it. It's like they don't believe what they're saying. They're trying to accumulate power. And for me, that's what Black Lives Matter has always been. It's been a move for power. It's never been about racial justice or a racial minority. And I think this will.
But think about it. You just gave an example of the Joe Rogan and January 6th comparison, which is insane, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So even beyond the BLM, which I'm sure we'll tap on because we're talking about the book, but you talk about the left being is 5 times worse than this kid, and he's a high school kid, so he has the right to be a little confused, right? But you got people who are like, they're like, oh, they're so hurt and offended by things, by Trump, by this, by that, right? And I'm not even saying the particular thing they're pointing out about Trump was a nice thing or correct, proper to say, but they're offended, right? They're like, in the corner crying, but they're on the left. So watch their movies, right? Listen to their songs. Look at the things that they tweet. It's like, there's no way you're that offended when you're celebrating TV shows that prop up characters who've had 5 abortions. And you're like, yay, let's have a party for it. Or, teenage, grown men having sex with 18-year-old boys. Yay, let's nominate it for Best Picture. A movie literally won Best Picture a few years ago about a woman falling in love with a fish. Do not tell me you're offended. Stop being a child. They're not offended. So that's the point. It's not like you're justifying someone else's bad behavior. I'm shocked by them pretending that they're hurt by it. Like, oh, my, crying in the corner, like, I can't sleep at night because somebody called a woman a bitch. Like, really? 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 You don't believe that, right? So, but we've fallen into the trap that we either argue to defend it or put it down, or act as if we already lose the debate because we're acting as if they believe in it. We know they don't.
Yeah. I'm sorry, my wife is trying to distract me. She's running around flashing me in the window right here because I can see outside.
Wait. Why is she flashing out? No, not gonna do it. Okay. Oh, go ahead. Carry on, sir. I'm listening.
Oh, well, I have 9 acres. Like I said, like there's no one around.
Oh, that's true. Touche.
So, yeah, she's not shy about being outside. So, okay. Well, I wanted to get into the book now, and so I brought up Black Lives Matter for a purpose. One of the things that you kind of, it felt like you were brushing along the way I look at this movement when you were talking about what's her name, Patrisse Cullors, is that correct? Is that her name?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So you brought her up in the book, and one of the things I see, the way I interpret what is happening with like Black Lives Matter is that black is not a race. It's an ideology. Like you kind of got a whiff of this when Joe Biden was like, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black, like, and it's kind of like, I think you mentioned it in the book too, when they talk about being politically black. Right. And so but to me, it seems like just saying black, as far as what they're saying, is just shorthand for politically black. And therefore, when you have like a Rachel Dolezal or what's that other guy? They call him what? Talcum.
Talcum X.
Yeah.
Talcum. I mean Sean King.
Yeah, there you go. I can remember Talcum X. I can't remember Sean King.
Martin Luther the Cream. He's got many nicknames. But
anyway, so like, yeah.
No one ever calls him Sean King though. But go on.
Yeah, but so like, to me, it just feels like the entire thing is a play on words, like what Orwell wrote about in his essay Politics in the English Language, where the English language is being manipulated and weaponized, and words don't really mean what words mean, right? So racism is white, like you have to be white to be racist, and even the ADL had put that on their website for a while up until this Whoopi Goldberg scandal, and then they changed the definition again. So I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on that, like my thoughts on that. That are that black is not a race; that it's an ideology now.
Well, now that's interesting. See, here's the problem with the black thing. It's because the one piece that you're definitely right about is the changing definitions. Now, the left does it more than anyone else, but the the problem with black as a race is there's factual issues, but that's not even the bigger problem, right? Because you can say that race was made up by the black, I mean, was made up by the slave owners, and particularly in America, to draw a distinction between these people and these people. And if you go back centuries, no one was walking around talking about black.
Right.
That's a fact. However, even if you say, well, the word evolved and this is the case, and we're a different race, and you can't really call the blacks in America Nigerian because they're not all from Nigeria. You got to track and find out where they are. So this is a simpler form to do this there. And we do have some similar things culturally and things that we do that are somewhat similar to some degree across regard regions and everything else. So let's label it something. If you wanted to give them that argument, here is the problem with that though. Because it's not even just a left thing at this point. Everyone has their own definition, and there's no consistency to it. It's the problem, right? So we'll say, that the whole black thing was made up by white racists. So by that definition, we should all now today say, why listen to the racists and give it all up? But then people say, why should I give up my heritage? But then you got other people saying that there's culturally black people. So politically black people, right? So if black is a race, as we're defining it in America today, then all black people who fit under this genetic bucket should be black, period, right? Yeah. But they're not, right? So the Nicole Hannah-Jones, she made the comment you mentioned, will say everybody's not politically black, right? But then others will say there is black culture, and even conservatives will say that there is black culture. They'll give you examples, but they'll give you tangible things and actions that some blacks don't do, right? So if it were a race, if you don't do those things, then you're still black, right? And they'll say they're still black, but what if most of them you don't do? What if you don't, listen to R&B music, double dutch, or listen to soul music, or go to church, or do these other things? You didn't grow up in a certain class, and you didn't grow up in a certain neighborhood, and all your friends are white because you grew up in a white neighborhood. Are you black? Most people will say yes, but by the definition you're giving, then no. So which is it? So then they'll define it as how other people see you. So that's my issue, is that you can keep changing what it means, and you can use that to put as many people in the black circle that you want, and move anyone out of the black circle you want, right? And that's the real problem of it. Some people say that it is there's certain things that blacks do, but all blacks don't do them, right? But then they wouldn't in turn say the same things to white, because here's the other thing that's weird. Then they'll compare, like you'll say, and I'm not saying this because I definitely agree that there's black culture, but you may not have seen it because it was mostly black conservatives. But there was this big debate between black conservatives, some who say there's black cultures, others who say we need to ascend beyond race. And they were like, well, how do you define it? And they were going back and forth with the definition. The issue with the people who were arguing for black culture, it's not necessarily that they were wrong, but the example was weird. They would say, yes, we have a black culture, we do X. An example would be that the Italians do this, or the Germans do this. But see, their example was never that whites do this, because they're understanding that whites as a whole don't all do the same thing. And if from an ethnic standpoint, they would do things as Greeks, as Italians, as Jews, if you want to count Jews as white, which is a whole nother thing Whoopi got in trouble for. But the problem is, if black is a race, then white is a race, right? So, but they're saying black is a race, but white is not a race. But they always talk about, so if white's not a race, white is black, and then it's Italian, German, so forth. Why do they talk in terms of white? There's black excellence and black girl magic, but then there's white supremacy and white privilege, right? So the one is a race, and the other is just, we're going to group all the other races. So then you run into the issue of, if black is a race and you're treating them as race, and Asian hate, then should you lump all whites together? Right. So all Asians don't get to be, what does that even mean? It doesn't get to be Chinese, Japanese, Indian. I've always, when I was younger, I was like, if I was, Chinese, I'd be mad that they just say Asians, because there's a huge difference between me and someone from India, but you just say Asian. right? Same thing for whites, right? So blacks can be X, but to keep in mind, blacks are talking ADOS. They're not talking about immigrants who came here from Kenya and Nigeria and Ghana. Those people are, they look black to whites, but black in the black community, they're not black. We're ADOS. They're, black immigrants, and it's separate. They at the point that they dismissed Jamaicans, right? That they're not really black. So that's the real problem with the race, is that, and then the academics and the people who are real well read will go into the factual genetic breakdown of all those kind of things, which you can't deny them because they're factually correct. But most people in today's society don't care about that. So I don't care what you tell me genetically of this and that and doing it ancestry. I'm telling you, in America, that's why, I defended Whoopi, because Whoopi was right but factually wrong. And I was thinking about writing about that. And what I was saying, it gave me an opportunity to tell black people, to tell white Americans this interesting thing about most black people. Now, nothing covers everything. But what I say that they'll find interesting is say, do you know how many races black people, the average black person thinks there are? I say 3. And if I told you 3, most people can guess them. They'll guess 2 of them, but they won't get the 3rd one. You know what they are? You got to like this. To the average black person, there are 3 races. There's black, there's white, and then there's other, right?
Other.
Because in America,
I thought it was going to be Asian.
So the problem, I know you were going to think that. Everybody says, or maybe Mongoloid. They go all the way back there. Because this is the way the average black person will break it down. Because we're not. So Whoopi was correct if she was thinking American. She was trying to take a global thing, because the Holocaust was a global thing, and Germany, the Germans did this stuff because it's over there, and bring it to America. Because the way the average black person did that is like, we know who's black, right? We look at white people. We look at you and we see you white. You're white. So to them, Jews are white, and it complicates matter because technically Jews will identify as white for ease. Because technically Jews are not white, but the Jews will say, as a white person, I can't say this, but they're saying they're white. So if I'm black and I don't know much about their background and they say they're white, then I believe them. So to them, the naked eye is what counts. I see white, you're white, period. So a Hispanic guy in the neighborhood is brown. I get to where we label him. But when we turn on Telemundo and we see those people that speak in Spanish, but they got blonde hair and blue eyes, so they're white. Right? So everybody's white. And then black, we know. The other is the interesting thing. So yes, they know Asians are Asians, but they don't have to. But then there's other. You think of Chinese, but you have to think of other groups, right? So you have to think of a Pakistani, someone from some Saudi Arabia, things of that nature. Someone who has a look, like Greek or Mediterranean, who's darker than the average white person, and they have an accent, but I can tell where they're. They're not trying to figure out what it is. They put them in the other box because technically, other is white adjacent. So other in their minds are the people who may not look visibly white, but they benefit from affirmative actions and other set-asides that were made to correct the racism against blacks in America, and now they're benefiting from it. So those are the people who can come over here, last year not speaking English, and they'll be opening their business in 3 years. So they'll say, yes, that's because they're benefiting from things because we're lumping minorities together and we're acting as if they're similar to black. So in America, the race thing is black. Everything that we do to help minorities is really centered around the fact that blacks were slaves and then Jim Crow and they're marginalized more than anyone else in this country, which is technically true. So they're saying we're trying to right that wrong. So everything should be, and to be clear, the average black person is not anti-Semitic, does not hate Hispanic, anybody else. They're just saying in America, our plight was worse, so fix the black thing first. So the average black person is not anti-Semitic, but they're like, Jews are white, right? The average black person has nothing against Hispanics, but they don't like illegal immigration. The average black person doesn't like, Middle Eastern people coming over here and being able to get certain jobs or get set aside as a minority. They don't like this push for women, like we need more women on this and that in all these positions, more women CEOs. They're like, no, we need black first. I'm not saying no women, get black first and then do them. So to the average black person, that's the way they see things. So all Whoopi was doing was putting a black American view on race, but trying to translate it and juxtapose it into the world where it doesn't fit. So that's what she was doing. So was she technically wrong? Yes, but she obviously wasn't being malicious. The woman said it was evil. So the fact is you suspended her for saying what, 65% of black people believe and saying it was evil and it was wrong and it was bad. What are you suspended her for? You're mad because she calls you white? You call you white on a regular basis. So that is the reason why. So now the interesting thing about it, though, you saw a good percentage of people, including conservatives, defending her. But why were they defending her? If you go look at Twitter and read articles, they were defending her under free speech, cover, saying, well, what she said was wrong and bad and vile and stupid, but she had the free speech right to say it. No, I'm defending her because she didn't really do anything wrong. You could be wrong, but not do anything wrong. Millions of people, lots of people on a regular basis go on TV and say things that are not completely true. And sometimes they're wrong enough that they apologize for them, but you don't suspend. I mean, if that was the case, we would suspend Don Lemon would never have gotten promoted from when he said that the Malaysian flight disappeared and maybe it went into a black hole or aliens took it. But they didn't suspend him for it. They just said that's stupid and they moved on, right? Plenty of people go on TV and say things, you don't suspend them for it. So that's what I thought was odd. But I think that, it's interesting. And I think people do need to understand the unique way Blacks view race.
Well, the first thing I thought of whenever with this whole Whoopi Goldberg scandal, and I didn't think it was a scandal. I thought she made a mistake and lack of knowledge. Like some people just don't know things, and it's like, okay, like I've spoken out of turn before, like so has everybody else. She just happened to do it in front of millions of people, and then the world went, caught on fire. But what I was thinking of, I don't know if you've ever read Thad Russell's book, Renegade History of the United States.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so
Mm-mm.
one of the things he talks about in the book, it's a great book. You'd probably enjoy it. Y'all would have a great conversation reading your book and just knowing Thad. It's really someone I would suggest you chat with if you ever get the opportunity. Y'all would have a great conversation. But he talks about like the term Caucasian and where it came from, right? And Caucasian was something that was developed after World War II to protect the Jews as part of kind of white, the white culture as a Caucasian. And Caucasian comes from the Caucasus Mountains in between Turkey and Russia. Like most people that identify as Caucasian have no link back to the Caucasus Mountains at all. So it's one of those weird things that's kind of become a trope within our society in, after World War II, because of they were trying to prevent another Holocaust. And so these academics began coming up with these labels to help protect people. And it in turn created these conflicts.
Oh, I mean, all of this stuff is just different ways to kind of insulate your group and separate yourself and identify yourself from other groups. I mean, I did the Genius of Thomas Sowell podcast, and we talked about a chapter in his book where he talks about sorting and the difference of the way people sort between self-sorting and third-party sorting. But then also there's books out there, I talk often about if you focus just here in America. So here's an example. So like I talked earlier about Italians and Germans and Jews and things of that nature. Now today, you say white people could assume all those people are white, right? Mm. But let's take Germans, for instance, right? Germans are white. That's the way we look at it. White, race, whatever you want to call them. Were Germans collectively white in America in 1910?
Right.
Right. All these groups, there's books about people, how they all became white, how the Irish became white, how the Germans became white, how the Jews became white. I mean, you talk about, Jim Crow and separate water fountains and all the signs, but there were signs that said no Jews. There were signs that said no Italians. Germans got here in World War I. Germans were interned. Everybody knows about the Japanese internment camps, but very few people know that Germans were interned in the first war. So, but to a black, the way we view America, race in America, we were like, how could that even happen? How can you tell an Italian from a German from a this? Now, granted, most of them were immigrants, so they spoke a different language, but as they assimilated, if you have similar skin tone, you move into the middle class, and then you just become, voila, you're the same. Now we're at the point that we're saying Hispanics are moving that way. No, first it was Asians. So Asians are white adjacent. I don't know if you saw the report where they were doing for school. I don't remember if it was like high school or college, but they were taking their, trying to break down percentages of, test scores and all this kind of stuff. And minority versus white, and they took the Asians out.
Mm.
Right? We want to get a number. We need to take the Asians out. Then we measure the rest of the students, minority students versus white, because they're white adjacent. Now we say the same thing about certain Hispanics, right? We're going to get to the point that people who immigrate here legally from certain African countries, probably Nigeria and Ghana and Jamaica and other, places, like they're going to pick certain places. They're like, well, they don't count because they do so well. So it's not really your skin color, your language, or your religion, it's how well you do. So that has traditionally happened in America. And we see it, it's slower if there's a different skin color, because you got to be able to separate them and parse them out. But we're seeing it happen now. So at the end of the day, most of the people, there are plenty of racist people who are against other religions, who are against their other races or whatever. But most of the people who come off as that way are more about, like either a class thing or, assimilation. If they live the way I think, so I live as an American X way, and all the people who live like me, those are my brothers, whether they're women, male, Indian, Native American, Jewish, I don't care. We live alike, right? And those who don't, see the same values that I see as important and prioritize them, those are others. And that's just normal human nature. And that's the way people react.
Yeah, one thing that I think has kind of shaped, at least up to date, my worldview on things is my wife is South African, and
Mhm.
so I pay attention, not like close attention, not like I do to our politics, but I do pay attention to their politics. And I've noticed, and we had talked about this before, like, all right, so like she has a lot of Indian friends because the Indian population is very high in South Africa. There are a lot of Indians, and there's a lot of Indian influence in South African food. Um, and so she was telling me that during apartheid, her friend who's an Indian couldn't go to like water parks because they were considered black, right, as
Mhm.
Indians. And so in South Africa, it's kind of like what you were saying. There's like three races, but in South Africa, it's not other, it's colored, right? So coloreds are like mixed race, or like what America used to call mulattoes. And
Yeah.
so
Anybody with color.
yeah, right. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, we're all colored people. Go figure.
Right.
Yeah. So, but they call them coloreds, and they kind of have their own culture. They're shunned by black South Africans, and they're also shunned by white South Africans, and so they're kind of like their own little thing. And they have a very large population in like Cape Town, and so
Mhm.
it's like let's say like you go over to South Africa. If you with your skin tone went over to South Africa, you would be labeled as colored. And not understanding that culture and the way that they view race over in that country, that could be, very confusing to you because you're like, wait, what are you talking about? But it's the way that the American culture has like really attached itself to this whole diversity as our strength, and these the color of your skin matters. It's like, where did this come from? Like this wasn't a thing for forever, right? It like most people were like, Martin Luther King was right, like we should judge people by the
Or there
content
was
of
a
their
debate
character.
between the two, and his group won.
Yes,
Right. Or
yeah,
there was a
exactly,
there was a debate and they won. Right. So yeah.
right. Yeah, and so you don't I don't I look at what's happening in America, and I think about what's going on in South Africa, and I'm like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to be in that situation. Like they've lowered testing requirements to become like professionals through like medical school, let's say. To You only have to get like 30%. You don't want that. You want your doctors to be the best. Like, you know what I'm saying? And I remember talking to my wife, and she was telling me, like, I won't go to certain doctors because they only are doctors and they've only received their degree because of the color of their skin. And I see America doing this. And I'm like, this is worrisome. This is a problem.
Right. Well, first I want to say diversity is not our strength. Diversity is not bad or good. I mean, it could be good in some cases, but it's not our strength.
Right.
Because if it's the strength, you make it a priority. We'll get into that. That's silly. But one thing, I've never been to South Africa. The one question I have, and I can totally understand the way they break that down and what you explain. But one question, because you use as an example, like let's say you with your skin tone, but let's say it was actually me. My only question is, because I see it in other places in the world I've traveled, but I've never been there. Would it be different even if they have a skin color thing once I start talking? Because when you're American, that all that other stuff tends to come off the table. They have a totally
Oh,
different,
right.
good or bad view of America, and they're like, "Oh no, he colored, but he's American." So
Yeah. No,
so do they
exactly.
treat Black Americans different when they go there?
They treat Americans very well. They like Americans because we come there
I mean,
with
but
money.
even if you were Black American, you might get some looks at first, but once you start
Once you
talking, I
open
know
your
Blacks
mouth,
all around the world can tell.
yeah, once you open your mouth,
You might as well be white. Yeah, you're American. You might
yeah,
as well be white at that point.
exactly, because you're coming there with money. There's nobody there has any money, so
Yeah, so it's a whole different thing. Yeah, but as far as the diversity thing, you're right about being counting race is the issue. Wanting the best is good. You should not be ashamed to do it. The diversity is our strength is wrong on several um, uh, lanes here. One is because they make it a priority. So if it's our priority, you can think it's good, but when it's your priority, you are fighting so hard for that more than anything else. And that can never be a positive result because you are willing to do anything to get this diverse mix. But the other problem is, what is diversity, right? They
right.
have everyone has different ideas of what it is. So is diversity, and let's say diversity is scam. What they forget is, because they bought into the leftist view that Blacks are the same and Italians are the same and Jews are all the same, and we're not. So in theory, you can have a room, you can have a classroom, you can have a group of doctors, you can have whatever, academics. You have this group and you want it to be diverse. And there were women and there were men and there were older people and there were younger people and there were gays and there were Jews and there were Blacks and there were this, right? But let's say they all are, you can even go anywhere, they're all right wing, Sean Hannity, Trump loving conservatives.
Mm.
Do you really have a diverse room? Because usually people use the example of all left and blah, but that works either way, right? If they don't have viewpoint diversity, is it really diverse? Because the whole argument that the diversity people will make, we need to have these different people because everyone brings a nuanced and different cultural and personal backgrounds to a situation, and that these different thought processes will give us different, better solutions, help us be more innovative because they know other things and they think differently. So what if they're all, diversity, they look diverse, but they all think the same way?
Right.
Are you really having diversity? So, but they don't want viewpoint diversity. They want, it to be, an aesthetic diversity, and that's all they care about. So that's the other problem with diversity. So for instance, you got this Supreme Court justice pick argument. And so you got several of the people who are like, yay, diversity would be great. We need this. And I'm glad that he's following through on this promise. You got conservatives who are mad and they're saying, no, he shouldn't do this. This is bad. And then people who are trying to counter their argument are saying, but it's not the first time it happened. Reagan promised, this person promised, and all that stuff. And they're factually right. One thing, though, is like, but who says it's right just because they did it? But beyond that. So that's their argument, right?
Mm-hmm.
But my thing is that, so I take a different angle. I said that people don't really believe, again, what they're saying. Because let's just be honest. So let's assume that there is a position open on the Supreme Court. No, scratch that. Let's say we have this new king, Fiat. He can just pick whomever he wants. So he's going to give you a choice because diversity is so important. We need more minorities. So I can either give you to the leftists, since they're the ones making the claim. So I am going to talk specifically to the leftists, right? What liberal policies? You can either have 70 to 80-year-old white straight men who are really progressive, right?
Mm.
And you get to pick. Or you can have 9 no white men, only 2 men, 7 women. They will be Asian, Black, a Muslim, a Jew. They're going to be really diverse, right? 2 Black people, a Hispanic person, whatever. But all of them are going to be strict constitutionalists like Clarence Thomas. You get to pick either one you want, and we go with what you want. Which one are you picking? Which one do you think they'll pick?
Oh, they'll pick the white guys.
But no, I thought diversity was the strength.
Yeah, but yeah, it's
We don't want patriarchy is bad. We
yeah,
don't want no more straight white men.
but
So
that
my
goes.
argument is they're lying to you. The diversity would be nice to have, but what they really want are leftists
Yeah.
because they don't want 9 Clarence Thomases, do they?
No,
They didn't even put Clarence Thomas in the African American Museum.
Yeah, yeah, I know. They still to this day call him an Uncle Tom. I hear it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes back to my point when I said that like black is an ideology. It's not a race when they're talking.
When they're talking, definitely not. Whatever your argument is about them, they are talking about a whole different thing. They're talking about a very finite position of people. You must be black. You must think like us. So you can be, so like where ADOS is like, let's focus on black American descendants of slaves, right? They're like, look, we don't want the Clarence Thomas Sowell type of it. We'll take the people who agree with us on this. We'll take black immigrants if they agree with us on this. We'll take people who vote a certain way. We'll have those are our black people, and we'll take allies. So it was funny. It's just a nuanced thing. I was laughing. So I was on Tavis Smiley's show, invited me on to do an hour, and I hadn't seen him in a while. I know him. I know who he is, but I didn't know he had a new show. So I went back and listened to a few episodes, and he had Tim Wise on, right? You know Tim Wise? He's like the liberal white guy who writes on race all the time. Really liberal guy. Really, really leftist guy. Right. So I was listening to a couple episodes and I'm scrolling through. I was like, this won't be interesting. So I listened to that hour. Then he interviews me, right? Now, Tim Wise is a white man. I am a black man. He interviewed Tim first. Go back and listen if you don't believe it. This is a great, all this does is prove you right. So in the Tim Wise interview, he's like, hey, Tim, what's up, my brother? My brother from another mother. This is Tim, my brother. Tim, what do you think white folk is? I love Tim. Tim can talk about race when he talks about race because he talks about race. Tim knows what he's talking about. And they come back from break. It's like, I'm with the great Tim Wise who can break down race better than anyone else I know. Nobody can talk about blah, blah, blah. Then he interviews me. So you wrote this book, Charles. Then it comes to the culmination. He built it up. And then he literally asked me this question. And he says, I got a question. Who elected you, the Negro in charge of apologizing for white folk? So I asked you, where's my brother? I even said to him once, because I'm on and it's live. So I'm listening, I'm on hold during the break. And then they playing these commercials about, and we root for the people who's black. And we vote. I said, I just heard your commercial and it said that you root for and support anybody who's black. So I'm hoping I'm gonna get some of that support. Well, I support you, man, but I want to get you right. But Tim Wise was like, what's up, my brother? Right. So to those types, here's your race complication. Tim Wise, you mentioned Sean Talcum X and Rachel Dolezal. Tim Wise is soul brother number one. I'm a cracker.
Yeah.
So there you go. So they don't believe what they're saying.
Right. And this goes into the subtitle of your book. You call it like what? Progressive racism, right?
Yep. I call it progressive racism. It's the kind of gentler racism. So they say and act the same way the vile John Calhoun is. He's like my motto, because you got to look him up. John Calhoun, lots of people who we always say, George Washington owned slaves, but at least George Washington said, I know this is wrong. X. You can say he didn't believe it. He's immoral. He's a hypocrite. That's different. John Calhoun owned it. John Calhoun was like, look, and he wasn't like, these people are savages, let's kill them all. He was like, look, this is a benevolent thing. He was like, blacks are inferior to us. If left to their own devices, they'd be tripping over themselves dying. Slavery is a good thing because that's how we keep them alive. They weren't smart enough to keep themselves alive. John Calhoun, my number one, clearly racist, genetically blacks are inferior guy. Fast forward, 150, 200 years. Now we have a group of whites who are like, look, blacks need help. Blacks are in jail. Blacks are selling drugs. Blacks are uneducated. But I want them to do better. But how are they going to do better unless white folks help them? They can't do it on their own. It's literally John Calhoun.
Yeah.
The only difference is their intent is different. John Calhoun was never intending on making them better. He just wanted to manage them. They're like, we want to make you better. But before we can build you up and make you better, we must admit that you're inferior. They're John Calhoun.
Right.
It's a kind of gentler racism, but it's the same thing. So Julianne Moore, the actress, when they did, I don't know if you remember the clip they did. What was it? What was it? They had a thing where they were like, I apologize, or I recognize, or something. It was a bunch of actors doing some stupid patronizing thing to blacks. But in Julianne Moore's clip, she said, blacks are being murdered in their homes, slaughtered in their streets. I'm like, really? All of them? Because I've known black people for a half a century. Zero of the black people I've known in my life have been murdered in their home or slaughtered in the streets.
Yeah.
None of them. Right?
Right.
So, and I'm guessing none of the ones she knows. Now, does it happen? Should people get prosecuted when it happens? Yes, but not in what she's talking about. She's talking about the government, the state. She's not talking about black on black crime. She's not talking about accidents. She's not talking about domestic situations. She's talking about the state is systematically dragging blacks to the middle of the street and then executing them and then laughing and taking selfies.
Right.
But that's what she thinks of my life. They think black life is sad, terrible, and inferior, and we need to make it better. So the only difference between they and John Calhoun is they think they should make it better. But let's not be confused. They think being black is horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and this is what I said after George Floyd was, I called it the blowback riots, right? Like the CIA talking point about blowback and why Al Qaeda would attack the United States. I called it the blowback riots because a lot of these people have been brainwashed to believe that exactly what you said, that they're being murdered that's like a genocide taking place in the streets of America. And so they like went out there. A lot of these people go out there onto the streets and they believe they're in a war for their lives. And so is as much as I disagree with the tactics and the way that they went about the Black Lives Matter riots and protests, I do have some understanding why some of these people were doing the things they were doing and getting so violent, because it's like you're being told that you are at risk to be murdered at any given time. Like, how else are you supposed to act? You know?
That is a very important statement. I say that often. I tell people, I said, the bigger problem isn't the reaction, it's what they believe. You're totally right. I say there is a problem. If there's an income gap or whatever, you want to fix it, you go out and find out what happened. How bad you think the problem is will dictate how you react. And I've said this in a couple of interviews. I said, look, if you think race is a problem and it's somewhere between 1 and 11%, you will approach it that way. If you think that blacks make less money on average than whites, but it's because of a skills gap, then you go out there and you train them and you give them more skills so they can make more money. But if you think the entire system is out to get you and they are arbitrarily murdering blacks, then the only answer is to burn down the system. And so you act in a manner that will burn down the system. That's when you say, well, I don't care if they loot these stores because looting is reparation. That's when you say, so a couple people got shot. Well, somebody's got to you got to break some eggs to make an omelet. So they went a little overboard and they beat up that white guy who was driving home. Well, he's been living his whole life with privilege. He could take a little butt whooping. That's what makes them justify bad acts. Because you told them that they were in the middle of a war. And when there's a war, there's casualties. Right? So you build this up and then the media adds some seasoning on it, just keeps throwing gasoline on it. It's like, yes, white man, you got, I mean, I hate to go back to the idiot again, but Don Lemon, whatever you think racism problem is, common sense people would look at this and say, okay, I got a gay man, because they're supposed to be marginalized, very successful on TV. He is in a relationship and living with a white man, and he goes on TV with a sad, straight face and say, white men are the scariest people on the planet. If I ever see a white man, I curl up in a ball. I mean, really, and no one looks at him and say, but don't you go home to a white man?
Yeah.
And how do you break the code? How do you break the code to know which white man you should sleep with and which white man are trying to kill you? Maybe he's going to kill you in your sleep, Don. I wouldn't go home if I were you. Oh, he says it because he doesn't really believe it. That's how he can go home to that man.
Yeah, well, in 5
so,
minutes
and you have
that.
a platform.
I was just going to say, in 5 minutes before that, him and Chris Cuomo were, hey, brother this, hey, brother that, I'll see you later, blah, blah, blah. You
Oh,
know?
Chris Cuomo's white, isn't he?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, no, that's the thing. And the problem is people look up for whatever reason they shouldn't in respect to celebrities. That's my biggest problem with LeBron. LeBron would probably be definitely in my top 5 of the most dangerous people when it comes to race. It's because what he does, and I know his intent's not bad, but what he doesn't realize is that he's talking to all these people who look up to him. I'm a 19, 18-year-old black man living in the inner city, struggling to survive, but I'm making it through. I got a minimum wage job. I'm watching these people with their flashy cars sell drugs, but I want to do it the right way. And my one hope is to watch a LeBron and an Oprah and all those people and say, you know, despite all this racism, you can still make it in America. Turn TV on, LeBron is crying about why don't they love us? Or he said, man, we being hunted. Y'all don't know what it's like. I'm being hunted. Not only is it not true, what most people miss is that 19-year-old kid who was doing his best to ignore the negative around him, the one thing he was looking forward to, the optimism he saw was in LeBron. And now he's thinking to himself, if LeBron was worth $1 billion and he's afraid to be black, there's no hope for me. Might as well take this apron and this McDonald's hat off and go start selling drugs, because what's the use?
Right.
So whatever problems he may think really exist, does he really want to be giving this message to people?
Yeah. Well, I want to kind of shift over, because I think one of the most important things you cover in your book is the movement for Black Lives. So will you explain what movement for Black Lives is and why is no one talking about this?
I wish I can do the first one. I wish I can do the second one. Literally, I'm the only guy. I mean, there are massive people better than me, more money than me, more famous than me, and more, have more influence than me. I wish I could sound the alarm and pass the baton to one of them. But I to be honest, I didn't know it. I found it. So I set out to make a book about BLM to basically try to get white people to stop giving them money. They're not doing what they're saying to do. I can do my victory lap. You check out the New York Post. I recently wrote an article that kind of breaks down all these problems that they're facing now. They're being investigated, but really what they've been all along. I've been saying this all along. So this is the beginning of my victory lap. But I'm looking at the BLM and I'm trying to say, and early on, like everybody's talking about who's the leadership. Right at the beginning, I said, no way Patrisse Cullors is running this organization by itself. Who's the organization leaders? So Floyd dies, people are pouring in all this money. And I'm like, this is weird. So I go to the website. Not only are there no financials, they've been in existence for like 5 years. No, 6 or 7 years at the time, 13. Yeah, 7 years, but there were no leadership. And I thought that was odd, right? So I'm saying, I'm gonna dig around and find. So I find out this big pot of money, $100 million being gifted. And the headline said BLM, but you read it says the Movement for Black Lives. So what's this? So I just started clicking links. And I find the Movement for Black Lives. And basically what it is an umbrella organization, also leaderless, with no names and no board of directors. They don't send don't send people out to do media. You don't see anything about them. But on their website, they talk about having 170 organization network, and they provide guidance and training and all this kind of stuff. And they have a bunch of legal acts written, ready to go when Congress moves far enough to the left. They have a preamble, like a constitution. They have demands. They have what? So that's the other thing. BLM's website has very little, is scant on issues, demands, anything. It's like, hey, this is how we started. This is what we like. And that's it. This site, m4bl.org, has all kinds of information, their true beliefs. They lay it all out. They tell all the truth about what they believe, and they're clear about it. And no one knows about it. And to your other part, it's fascinating to me. So in this article, since they've been getting all this heat in 2020, they put out, at the beginning of this year, they put out an income statement. An impact statement, breaking down all the things that they've done and the finances for 2020. And I knocked them because it's 42 pages. Only one page talks about police brutality, which is their reason for being. Mm-hmm. That page says we supported the Breathe Act. We didn't write it. We didn't do it, which was a coalition put together and created by the Movement for Black Lives. So that's how Movement for Black Lives gets credit. BLM, gets press. BLM will make the news, and then in their quote, they'll say something about this organization. And then no one, these wonderful journalists, no one says, well, let me go find out who this organization is. So I write a whole section about who they are, give you their word. So when you think, well, as a white liberal, yeah, I'm gonna donate to them because they care about police and whatever. We need to help the black man, and then you find out that they say we hate capitalism. We want to tear down the system. That we push LGBTQ people to the front, and they're the leaders of our organization. Not that you have to necessarily have an issue with those people or people who live that lifestyle. It's why are there that is such a focus for them to head an organization that's about police brutality, right? About how they want to give reparations to migrants, and how they want to not defund but abolish police and detention centers and ICE detention centers and police from the school and all surveillance anywhere. So how do we catch all these people? So these same liberals in New York, because it's been a crime wave, when people get punched on the face on the subway or shooting, they catch them because of surveillance video, and they're happy about that. And then they go and give money to an organization that wants every camera gone. Listen to what I'm saying, people. This is asinine. So think, you're in school. You don't want your kid bullied, but they want no metal detectors to walk through the school. Okay, I can live with that. But no security guards in the school, no police in the school, no surveillance, so no cameras. And then they don't want anybody, I left this part out. No one under 23, because their minds aren't developed, and no one over 65 can be in jail. Not making this up. Go to m4bl.org and read the Movement for Black Lives website. It's insane. And no one writes about it but me. In this book, lots of people write about the 1619 Project and what's going on in school, and they write about BLM. This is the only book that writes about the BLM issue, the Movement for Black Lives that no one knows, and the 1619 Project.
Yeah, what I found so odious about this whole movement for Black Lives is like you said, like they're kind of under the radar. They're operating within the shadows, and it really kind of makes me think about like how the WEF operates, or how some of these NGOs operate overseas. And like you have the USAID that's working with the CIA overseas to overthrow governments and stuff like that, and you're like, what is going on here? And so.
But if you dig enough, you can at least find some people there. You can't find any people in these organizations.
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask, have you even to this day, after publishing the book, you still haven't like uncovered any people, like any of these NGOs or anybody that are funneling money to these people that could be
bigger groups giving them money? I have not. I need to try it again. I haven't, after you finish the book, you're publishing, doing all this press and stuff. But yeah, I wrote in the book, I said Rand Paul, when he was attacked by protesters at the RNC, he's like, we need to get to the bottom of this. And I said, I wish him luck, but good luck, because it's a tangled web, and did some financial breakdown there. And since then, the article I referenced in the New York Post, I talk about how when Patrisse Cullors stepped down because she got all this heat for buying all these homes, she handed the reins to these two women, right? Oh, we get names. The women immediately, you got to read this article, it's hilarious. The women immediately put out a statement saying, we did meet with the leadership council, but we couldn't come to terms on the scope of work, so we are not leading the organization. So we still don't know. They quickly threw their hands up, said nothing to do with them. But the funny thing is, I joke in the article about how they met with the leadership council. Sure, it'd be nice to know who this leadership council is. How did you get to them? Because the rest of us can't find them. Yeah. Right? There are no names anywhere, right? To be honest, there's no way Patrisse Cullors was running the organization. There's no way. No way that organization, maybe at the beginning, but after 16, after they got to a certain size, there's no way she's running it, and no way she's running it without a team. Right. So, but you can't find any leaders. No one wants to own up and say, hey, I run this great organization. I'm the CEO. I'm the executive director. No, everybody, it's just shadow, but people were funneling money into it. It's crazy for that respect alone. Nobody would give money if you cared about certain types of cancer or something else. You wouldn't give to the American Cancer Society if they had no names on their site. Right. If you didn't know who was running it.
Yeah.
Right. What they've been doing with the money, but you gave them money because it suppressed your white guilt. But what have we gotten for it? What have they done for policing? What have they done to fix anything? So policing is the same. So they haven't made it better and less likely for blacks to be profiled, and more people are being shot and the police are doing things. So it's gotten worse. So Yeah, I have to look into it again and see if people, but so maybe now that some attorneys general are going after them, some larger names than me with better resources will start digging into it because it's important to know who these people are. And more to me, more than the money, I don't even care about the money because they got it legitimately. They told you what they were going to do with it. And even though they didn't do things about policing, they told you it was for blacks. They didn't tell you they were going to do, fix anything or do all, and you gave it to them anyway, whatever. I want to know, go to the Movement for Black Lives website. I want to know who wrote all that stuff because that was obviously written like an administrator or a lawyer, who wrote all those acts, who made all those demands, who put all those stats up there, who built that site. I mean, go to the BLM site, go to their site. Night and day, BLM site compared to their site looks like somebody in the second grade built it. And then you go to the Movement for Black Lives, it looks similar to, Wounded Warrior or the, Ronald McDonald's House Charities. It is a well laid out tabs here, detailed website. Where all this information came from? Who wrote that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's what I want to know. I want to know who the brain did. You can get any leftist with money to give you money. That's easy. So even if you found the money, be like, oh look, liberal people with a lot of money gave them money. Surprise. That's not a surprise. I want to know who wrote that stuff.
Yeah.
And sit down and talk with the person who said they want to abolish police. And they want to skip over ADOs, for the blacks who really care about liberal policies, who support them. But hey, even they wouldn't be like, I'm okay with you skipping over. I told you how the race is viewed by blacks, skipping over ADOs and giving it to migrants.
Yeah.
Black people were upset about Biden saying that they were going to give $400,000 to illegals who had kids in these cases or whatever. They were like, what? Right. So I want to know who those people are. Have not found them yet.
Right. Well, and also why are they, as you pointed out several times in your book, why is it that every one of their demands, everything they say is so focused on LGBTQ and not on the black community? It's like,
and women. It's like,
yep. Yeah, and they don't even mention black men at all.
Yeah, I say that. Aren't they the ones, if we buy their argument that police are hunting us down, aren't the people most hunted black men?
Yeah.
But they're not after that. There's one paragraph, I wish I had it open, I would read it. They were like, we are strongly focused and prioritize women, femme, gay, trans, gender non-conforming, precariously housed. I almost have it memorized. Precariously housed, that's a good one, right? Cash poor, homeless, incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, Muslim, anything under the sun, dwarfs, everything. The only ones they don't mention are Jews and black men.
Yep.
Oh, and Christians, of course.
Right.
But that's fascinating that they wrote a paragraph that long. They could just squeeze in black men, couldn't get black men in. Because this is intentional.
Yeah.
If they intentionally left, if they wanted to put black men in there, black men would have made it. They had room to put black men in. Maybe you take out precariously housed, cash poor. I don't know.
Well, and it's like you said, it's written by an academic, whether it's an attorney or whatever. And it's like, okay, you just conveniently forgot that one label. Like you could.
How about the word I kept that I couldn't use, but now after writing it and researching them, I can say it like it's a normal word. You'll love this, people. They made up a term. They have an issue with, and they are working to demolish cis heteropatriarchy.
Yeah. Well, it's something you hear about
wasn't
now.
Enough. They needed cis heteropatriarchy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's bad.
Yeah. All right.
I think of people who and my target was people who are in the center and center left, because I think if they read it, they won't become right wingers, but they'll say this is problematic.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, we've seen this, through over the last couple of years, where you have this kind of movement of like the average Democrat who doesn't really pay a whole lot of attention to what's going on, but they always voted Democrat, and they're kind of moving more into the independent space and leaning right now because of how far everything's being pushed to the left by these groups and by these organizations. And so we saw this in Virginia, whenever the guy running for governor of Virginia was like sitting there saying, parents don't have any role in their kids' education, yada, yada, yada. And parents were like, whoa, hold up. Like you can tax the shit out of me, but don't fuck with my kids. Like that's kind of like the way
Right.
they view it. And so
Hmm.
this kind of leads on. Uh, this kind of leads on to the last subject I want to touch on. And I want to touch on the 1619 project just for a minute, because
Okay.
I I kind of had my own have my own view of what's happening here. Like I told you, I look at this as a cult, like as a religious movement. It really has like a lot of the same tendencies of religion. It has like icons and like prayers, in these chantings that you get whenever you watching the protests. These people are chanting and singing, and it's like it feels like a worship service in some ways, and it's this like very religious kind of like gathering that they're involved in. I look at the 1619 project and what they're doing as their creation myth, and that
Mm.
they need this creation myth of slavery and creating the United States to build upon and build their doctrine upon.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you're hearing a lot of that. John McWhorter wrote a whole book about in his woke racism book about how it's similar to a religion. I don't think so. I see why people say that, but I don't think so because it's missing some really important components. I mean, one of the biggest is that, even as an atheist, if you say this, that it's definitely dogmatic. If you say, yeah, but religion does that too when you talk about other things that may be different. But the biggest thing is whether they fail or succeed at it, uh, most religions aren't trying to, they're pointing to some moral founding. This isn't moral, this is more revenge. And they're not like tearing down other people. It's not like saying, if you go to Christ, you will live forever, or saying this. They're saying that this is the way to live. And let me show you all these terrible people, right? Let me talk to you about how the whites are the cause of all these problems, right? The religious are saying your sin is the cause of the problem. They're making your problem some other group of people, and they're sending you out to attack these people, right? But I get the dogmatic part, right? The ritualistic part and that kind of thing. And that's a good point. I think, whether it is or not, whether I'm right or McWhorter's right, it's definitely the 1619 project is definitely the creation myth. They are definitely hell bent on fitting this square peg into this hole, and it's going to fit no matter what. So they've been taken to task a bit on a lot of factual inaccuracies. I don't think enough. But in my book, I use those, but I also do two other things that are a little bit different. I attack it more from a logical premise,
Mm-hmm.
right? So my thing is, let's assume you're right. What you're saying makes no sense. Let's assume you're right. You're not. Slavery is the reason blacks are in jail today. Silly, but let's assume you're right. You are not proposing any solutions to fix it. If it's slavery, not current racism, you can't go back and reverse the slavery. So what do we do? There's no what do we do. If slavery was bad, it was. If there were a percentage of whites who were racist, it was, and it was high, and it got lower and lower over years. It still was never 100. Yet the project has no positives. In their mind, there were no abolitionists. So, right. So parallel to the time slavery was at its height, there were always whites and free blacks fighting to end slavery. That doesn't exist in the narrative of the 1619 project. They are wholly focused on the negative, and they don't care about anything else, anything that distracts them. So you talk about the founders. The founders were racist. I said the founders owned slaves, but all of them didn't. Can you mention the ones that just shut up? I got a narrative. The founders were slave owners. What about the third that weren't? Shut up. What about what the ones who were, Madison, Washington, and others, what they wrote about slavery? Doesn't matter what they were. It doesn't? Really? Because they teach you accurate history. Don't you want to know what they said? No, I don't. Huh. Why 1619? Because it's the year the first slaves arrived in America. And what is now America? Really? Is it? Or is it just the first slaves that came to America from the areas you want to highlight, right? Mm-hmm. Because we became a country from British people, so you want to say the Brits. But Spanish people were European. Spain is in Europe, correct? Correct. And they had slaves, right? Correct. And their slaves in Florida, Georgia, and other places were here before 1619. Correct. So why isn't 1532 the founding? Shut up, 1619. Right? So I'm shocked by the few historians who did take them to task, left a lot of that out. They said they attacked them for saying that the Revolutionary War was fault because they wanted to preserve slavery, which I write in the book about. But then if that was the case, that would indicate, or at least imply, that the British ended slavery and they didn't want it to separate from them because they wanted to stay where slavery still existed, but they didn't end slavery for another 70 years. Shh, don't tell anybody. No, 63 years after. Or they say that the country was founded in 1619. That's all they took them to task for. I go a little bit deeper about Blacks electing rebels, even though Blacks, the state legislator picked senators. I talk about, but then the bigger thing, like I say, is taking apart. And the other thing I do is I write a chapter for every essay. So they have an essay, you can read it, because I'm not trying to ban, I'll say on record again, not trying to ban them, but if you're teaching it, teach both. This is what they say about capitalism. This is what they say about traffic. This is what they say about mass incarceration. This is my rebuttal. See who's factually accurate. See which is most logical. And that's what I want people to do. Because I think it's bad to teach it in school without any counterpoint, because they're teaching it as if it's all the truth. And it's a good portion of truth, but there's a lot of lying by omission. And those omitted parts are so important that without it, you miss part of the puzzle and you get confused by what the true history of America is.
Yeah, and I really appreciated the way you approached that section of your book. Was you did give them credit when they were right. You were like, yeah, you're right about this, but you're forgetting that this person existed and that this happened and that, you know, and so you really did tie those lies by omission together. You brought that into the story and did a really good job with that.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what you said is true, but this is also true, and you left it out. If I added that to this, would that change an average honest person's perceptions of the story you're telling? Right. And in most cases, the answer is yes. Well, if I knew that, oh, this is the case, right? So I just wanted to make sure people knew those things that they weren't giving them.
Yeah. Well, we've been going over an hour. I really appreciate how gracious you've been with your time. And that we finally got it done. No interruptions. Everything worked. So
nothing dropped. Yes.
Yes. We plug away, man. I want everybody to go out and buy your book. So plug away.
The book is Race Crazy, BLM 1619 and the Progressive Racism Movement. You can find it everywhere. You can get it on Kindle. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. If you boycotting Amazon, you can get it at Amazon. You get it in a day. You can get the audio version, and it's read by a wonderful guy named Charles Love. So you can do that. I got a show, the Charles Love Show, which airs at 11 Central in Chicago. But you can, just go to AM 560, click the listen live link and listen to it live. Or afterward, go find the podcast. I do a podcast with the great Professor Will Riley and Shamika Michelle from Jason Whitlock's show. And that's a weekly podcast, and we have some great guests there. You can find it on YouTube, or you can listen to the audio version on Spotify or whatever you listen to, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcast. And what else? Education stuff. You can go to Seeking Educational Excellence, download curriculum, kind of look and see what we're doing from that front. 1776 Unite. So got a lot of stuff going on. My article in the New York Post on BLM should be out. I think it came out Sunday. So read that and look for me, wherever else, hopefully on TV. I think I do, Newsmax and Fox, at least one of the two, at least once a week. So.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and call you my brother.
I am out of plugs.
I will go ahead and call you my brother from another mother, and you keep fighting for truth, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Good talking to you.
You too, bro. Have a good one.
You wanna be a hero, instead you're just a slave. All your good intentions took you to your grave. Your pride is how they killed you. With the flag you wave just like a fool. They promised you a mountain, gifted you a stone. They demanded that you throw it into your neighbor's home, and then seize all that they worked for and give it to the throne just like a tool. Well, as we all just stand in line and glorify new ways of being cruel, it seems to me humanity is not something that they're teaching us in school. They dumbed us down all around, propaganda, their pollution. They set a cage up on the stage, a facade for all solution. They build a wall, block them all from this mental institution. It's insane. Now they're writing their own rule books and they're crossing all their T's. They're fashioning their people to all wear beggars' knees. If you want a clean drink of water, well, you must say pretty please. It's all a game. As we all just stand in line and justify these crimes done in our names, it seems to me authority and tyranny are both one and the same. Well, it's time to change the channel. It's time to set things right. Make them all rot with fear in their beds at night. Devour all their worthless souls and sacrificial right, just like we should. Cause this world it needs a cleansing to burn away the shame and destroy all the remnants of those who are to blame. And we'll stack them up like cordwood, watch them sizzle on the flames for good. Well, as we all just stand in line waiting for some kind of Robin Hood, our liberty will never be until our right to freedom is understood. Thank you.